Let me introduce myself. My name is Britton Zerker. I'm a senior PM manager at Microsoft. I've been at the company for 5 years, and I've worked on MDOP during that time. I've been in the industry for about 15. Previously, I was at VMware. Before that, I was at NTT Communications. So I've been in these sessions a few times. I've been talking about AppB for about 2 years now. I just want to get an idea of who we're dealing with here. So just a quick straw poll. If you could just raise your hand if this applies to you. How many of you today in your environments manage AppB4 in production? Okay, great. These are our people. Great. This is about probably 3/4 of the room. How many of you, and you can raise your hand again if you do both, how many of you manage AppB5 in production today? About the same number and about the same hand, so it's over 3/4, so that's great. This is our audience, then we expect that you probably have a good background in AppB. That means we can flow through some of the basics really quick. If you are new to AppB, there's a few hands that weren't raised. This may be a little bit over your head, but I bet there's stuff you can glean. And I do have a slide that summarizes the other sessions for AppB. There's 2 more tomorrow. One of them in the afternoon, I'll point out, will be a little bit better as far as overview. So make sure you hit that one. Stay around, though. I think there's some good things you can learn. This is essentially a fundamental feature of AppB5. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is announce, you have those surveys, you're going to fill it out. That's for our next version. We're already deep in planning, but let me show you the version that's going to be coming out with Windows 10 this summer. This is AppB 5.1. You notice it's now called 5.1. Now, the scope of this release is very similar to what you've seen in the past in our service packs. The reason why we're calling this 5.1 is this is ready for prime time. We've really heard your feedback. The biggest feedback that we wanted to get from you are those 4.6 deployments, what's blocking you, what's keeping you from going forward, and what are the stability and performance issues. And we feel over the last 3 releases, along with this one, we're ready for you guys to come. So you guys should already be in process and preparing to move off of 4.6, get fully to 5.1 when it comes out this summer. And of course, SP3, which is out today, is also a great release, and it's ready for prime time. Let me just quickly go through these things. We'll have more about this release in the coming weeks and months. Quickly in the first column, it's the same thing I talked about. AppB5 adoption was a huge emphasis for us in this release. We got a lot of feedback from you. These are the 2 biggest things we did. Supported QDrive paths when you do conversion, and support multiple scripts per trigger, which was a feature parity issue with 4.6. So these are going to be in 5.1. Hopefully allows you to be more successful as you move your packages and convert your packages to 5. The next column is self-explanatory as well. Application compatibility is a big thing. We want to make sure that we can support as many application types of applications, new OSs. So we've got Windows 10 support in there. The second item on there was a big customer request. Can we have some advanced tools in the package editor to modify packages after resequence without resequencing? We've done some good things there. The last 2 ones will help with appcompat for some of the blockers in getting some of your applications sequenced for AppB5. And then the last one, this one we're excited about, manageability. The AppB5 server. A lot of you have asked me, probably some of you in this room, are you going to continue to support the AppB server? We haven't seen a lot of updates. This should confirm it for you. Yes, we are. That's an important component of the product. And you'll see here we spent the effort to modernize the AppB5 server. It no longer requires Silverlight. It's now based on modern standards, HTML5. And yeah, okay, let's go ahead and crop that. That's a good one. HTML5 and JavaScript. It'll support mobile layouts, fast and fluid. Not a whole lot of new features. It's going to be pretty much on parity with the old server. But what this does do is allow us to be a little more agile in our development. It's much easier to maintain and update new features. So if you're using the AppB server and you've been worried about it going away, this should be your sign that it's not. And then the last one, it's always good to give you better diagnostics. It's been a little bit spotty in AppB5. This is our attempt to simplify and streamline. We have some more work to do, but this will be a good step forward. So hopefully you're excited about this release. We really are. Again, it'll be available for Windows 10. It'll support Windows 7, of course, and 8, but it'll be available around that time frame. One other thing to say. How many have heard of Project Centennial in this room? Wow, just some Microsoft guys I recognize. Okay. Then this is, maybe you'll be glad you came here. So at the Build conference, our developer conference last week in San Francisco, one of our Windows development engineers, John Sheehan, stood up and talked about this project, Project Centennial. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you want the detail and you're intrigued by it, that link in the upper right-hand corner, just jot it down. It's easy to remember. Go watch his full hour-long session where he talks about Project Centennial. In a nutshell, that first line tells it for you. It's a developer story, and it's an attempt to bridge your classic applications to universal Windows apps, which is our new universal app model. That's what we're calling UWA. And it's purely a developer effort. But what we wanted to say, and what your next question is going to be, well, how does it relate to AppV? Well, it shares very similar techniques. In fact, in the in code, it will probably share a lot of the same code. But the goals of the products are very different. One does not replace the other. They're complementary. They serve very different purposes. One is a developer story, helping our ISVs, our independent software vendors, to get to Universal Windows app. The other is for you guys, for the enterprise, to help you better manage your Windows applications, to help you with virtualization. So they're very different, but they would be complementary. And so the paint's not yet dry on this. It's not going to be available this summer. We're working on it really hard, and we're still going through the design phases, so I can't describe everything. But our goal on the AppV side is to make sure that there's plenty of benefits for you, the customer. The obvious one is if an ISV, when an ISV decides to move to the Project C format as they move their application to the Universal Windows app format, you'll be able to consume that application in AppV. And I think that's a big one. You will no longer have to sequence that third-party app. You can leave that to the vendor. They'll support it fully. They'll fix bugs, et cetera. So I think that's probably the biggest one to look forward to. So my overall message to you, go learn more about it. Stay tuned for more from us. If you're on AppV5 or if you're moving to AppV5, you're on the right path. If anything, this legitimizes your investment that you've made over the last few years. And more to come on this one. I'm excited about this one. I wish we had more to say, but we will in the future. All right? All right, so moving forward. All right, so before we get into connection groups, I'm going to fly through this. You guys are experts. Just give you a little refresher. Before we talk about connection groups, it's important to give you a baseline on the isolation properties in AppV5. It's very similar to AppV4. So when we talk about the application model, we talk about the hardware layer. On top of that, you have the OS, which has both the registry and the file system. On top of that, you put your standard local applications. In this case, these are MSI-based for the most part. They write files to the file system, to the registry. In some cases, they even write to the operating system, kernel drivers, etc. This is in a very well-defined format, as you know. These things can cause issues amongst themselves, the applications. Can cause issues down at the operating system layer as well. And that's why this whole concept of app virtualization came out about a decade ago, is how can we make this model better for customers to help them manage what sometimes is messy with your traditional app installs. So created AppV. This is the AppV5 model. You sequence, you package those applications using one of our tools into an application package. And AppV will construct then a virtual environment that abstracts the file system and the registry, some of the OS layer, into that actual bubble. So that application feels like it's native and running normally, but outside of the system, it's not viewed from other processes and the OS. So from the user perspective, it's running as if it was native too. So let's talk about the benefits before we go on to connection groups. I like to split them up into two. The first one are the benefits for your deployment. So if you think about those, some of the things I just hit on. One is you have the containerized package. So rather than trusting the vendor who can sometimes kind of spray files out and you don't know where they end up, you have more containerized situation with AppV. That allows you to be more predictive in your installs. You can use the same tools. You don't have to worry about silent install, MSI command line, all of those things. It's now an easy process. You pick your tool for deployment. It's always the same. And then for troubleshooting, rollback, patching, it really can help you save time and energy in that issue as well. Now, from the runtime side, this is where you also get some good benefits. I already talked about one. It limits the the possibility of having conflicts. It means you don't have to regression test as much as you normally would in an MSI. You don't have to worry as much. And even if you do have an issue, they're easy to roll back. Incompatible apps, they can run side by side, where before there may have been conflicts. You might have had to push one out to terminal services. Now you can run those side by side. And then you can go back here, see the previous slide. And then finally, you can coexist in some cases two versions of the same application that normally wouldn't be compatible running side by side. Again, the same situation. You'd have to run one on a different machine or a terminal server session. Now you can coexist those. So these are kind of the benefits of the isolation model in AppV5 and the way that it's constructed. So now let's jump over to just a really quick demo here. This will be very demo heavy today. So we'll start with a very simple one here. All right, so here I'm illustrating the side-by-side nature. You can see that sequence both JRE7 and JRE8. In a normal situation, these wouldn't be able to run side by side, and you'd have issues managing those with the applications. I have shortcuts here to just the control panel applet. So just to demonstrate this, you can see I've now got the control panel applet for version 7, and then running at the same time, I now have version 8. All right? So you've seen this demo before, nothing new to you guys. So quickly, I'm going to show you the isolation behavior by showing that down into where you normally see Java installed. So I go down now into the program files. You see there's not a Java or Oracle directory there. So it's not seen natively in the normal native location. If I go to the registry, it would be the same case. Remember, those are abstracted in that virtual bubble. So let me show you a trick here. So I'm actually going to run Explorer now in the virtual process of JRE7. And this is a great tip. If you don't know this one, if you don't know the start app virtual package command, it allows you to actually run a program process inside of the virtual bubble for troubleshooting or other things that you want to do. In this case, I'll run Explorer, but you could do something like procmon. It's a really useful command if you don't know about it. So I would look into it. So let's run this real quick. So the first thing I'm going to do is I already set up an object for JRE7, which just calls the get_appv package for JRE7. You see it prints that out here, and I'm going to use that object then in the command line for the get_appv client package. So very simple. I call the object variable get_appv client package, and then I'm going to call then I'm sorry, this was the wrong one. Start appv virtual process, then the appv client object which I have is JRE7, and then I'm going to start the process. In this case, it'll be Explorer. So when I run that, I see this very same Explorer. I now go down to the program files. Because this is now running, in an isolated bubble, I now see the Java directory, and here I see JRE7. Now I don't see JRE8, because again, applications, even with an appv, are in their own isolated bubbles. JRE8 would not be able to see this either. So there's a good practical illustration of kind of bring home to you how the isolation works. So let's move now to a practical situation. So I've got my JREs installed. I need both of them. There's applications that are going to depend on them. So let me minimize here. So I've got an appv server set up in this environment. I'm going to go ahead and refresh here. OK, so I want to deploy this free plane application. It's a mind map application. It's going to require JRE7. So if I come over here and launch this, here I go. I get application requires JRE. And why is that? Well, this is also a virtualized process, which means that it's also running in its own virtualized environment, and it cannot see JRE7. So this is the crux of what we're going to talk about today. Let me switch back over to the deck here real quick. So the crux will be how do we then take the good properties of isolation and make them useful for you? And so I'm going to invite up to the stage now Damon Karim, and he's going to take it from here. He's going to talk a little bit more about the connection group dilemma and how it's solved.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Britton. Yeah, give him a clap. Why not? Cool. So I hope you guys have got some energy. I know this is the second to last day and the last session of the day, but hopefully a lot of the content we're going to talk about today is really going to be quite interesting. So before we do kick into the content, I just want to say I'm absolutely honored and privileged to the max to be here today, to be able to speak to you at the very first Ignite here in Chicago. Before we kick into the content, let me just quickly introduce myself to you. And I thought, rather than me ramble on, the best way for me to give you a bit about my background is for us all together just to quickly play a game of Spot the Difference. So this time last year, I was in the US again. Obviously, I'm British, as you can probably tell from my accent. So I was back over here this time last year, and I was actually over at TechEd in Houston. And that was an amazing, amazing time we had out there talking about appv. So this is me this time last year. So I want to hand over to you now. Just anyone shout out any differences that you can see between me this time last year and me now. I can pull the same pose if that helps. So Britain got the obvious one, which is hair. Yeah, that's right. I've probably grown hair. It's probably the most obvious one since back then. Basically, my dad sat me down about a year ago and said, "Son, soon you're going to be bald like me." And it kind of got to me a bit, so I quickly started to grow hair. My barber loves me now because I'm basically at the barber every week getting a different style and just trying to maximize the time I've got with hair, knowing that eventually it's going to all fall out. Well, apparently I'm told so. Anything else? shirt, and that's the one I wanted. So I was really scared you guys were going to be really mean and say, I was either fat then or fat now. I might look fatter then, but it's just those shirts were really wide cut. They were like parachutes on me. Anyway, the shirt, and this kind of makes me emotional actually thinking about it now, because this time last year, I actually worked for Microsoft. And I worked for Microsoft as a premier field engineer, and I traveled the UK and the rest of the world at times, talking to our customers about AppV and their wider desktop strategies around user experience and all those wonderful things that we get our hands dirty with. Back in November last year, I made the hard decision to kind of go out into the big wide world, and I've also basically started my own consultancy called Virtual Vibes off the back of my blog, which is out there around AppV, where I basically offer AppV training and consultancy services out in the field. At the moment, I'm primarily engaged with a massive investment bank in London, where I help them with primarily AppV and relating it back to some really cool projects they've got in the pipeline around Config Manager, VDI, Citrix, desktop rollouts, and everything else in between. Cool, so that's me in a nutshell. Virtual Vibes trainer and consultant, former Microsoft employee as a senior Premier Field engineer. That's me, Tamim Karim. Enough about me. I know you didn't want to come here to hear about me. You came to hear about one thing in particular, and that was connection groups. Cool. So, quick raise of hands one more time. How many of you in here have used connection groups in some shape or form since AppV 5.0 was released? Okay, that's interesting. About half of the room. So the other half who haven't used it, I'm going to try and bring you along for the ride with me. This is an advanced connection group session, but hopefully we're going to start from the very basics and take you along for the ride regardless of your experience with connection groups. So why connection groups? So the connection group proposition is basically built up on top of what Britton was talking about earlier. And he done a great job in explaining why isolation is really desirable in a lot of circumstances. So we have our operating system like Britton talked about. We have our local apps. We have our AppV agent and those apps sitting pretty on top of that AppV agent. And most of the time, that isolation that you see there is exactly what we want, like Britton showed you with Java. However, sometimes, as Britton showed you, with applications that require, for example, to see Java, that isolation isn't as desirable. And that's where we can look to leverage connection groups to basically remove that isolation around our AppV applications and create a more shared kind of environment where two or more AppV applications can share that virtual environment together. So why would we want to do this? Well, the reasons we've pretty much already uncovered when we looked at the example back on the client machine with FreePlane, which is a mind mapping piece of software, and a dependency called Java JRE, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where they can't see one another and therefore FreePlane fails to launch. And it kind of gives birth to a wider conversation around a modular approach, a modular component-driven approach to packaging. And having that modular approach really can leverage some benefits and bring around some agility in how you deploy packages in your environment. And I've seen some people take it right to the maximum, and I've seen some people kind of dip their toe in the pool and just kind of get comfortable with it on a more basic level. But wherever you sit on that kind of scale, it's definitely some benefit either way. And some of those benefits are around the saving of repeated packaging effort. If you can imagine having to repackage everything again and again, when really you could package it on a one-time basis and reuse it, you can really take a much more modular approach. It's very similar, I guess, to other disciplines like coding, etc., where you can reuse code if you take a more modular approach. It's the same kind of thing for payloads in AppV as well. Another core benefit is we can do independent servicing. So we can actually look to be more intelligent in the way that we patch and update our AppV packages. Another core benefit is also granular targeting. So no longer do we have to move towards this one-size-fits-all world for every user on every single machine. And I guess nowadays that's just not acceptable anyway. We can now move to a much more tailor-made experience from an application delivery perspective for our users across their plethora of devices and environments that they log onto. And then a kind of bonus kind of add-on and a kind of byproduct of all of this is that we essentially save a lot of storage as well, because we're no longer reconsuming space for these shared dependencies or shared items. We're taking a much more modular approach, and therefore we can share those packages between those machines. Cool. So let's take a look at some of the key scenarios around connection groups. So there's probably two big hitters. There are other scenarios as well that we could talk about, but I'd say these are the two big hitters. And the first one is the middleware scenario. So let's take this example pre-connection group definition. Yeah? So we've got 3 applications, all of which have a dependency packaged inside them, right? And even in this scenario, we probably could be comfortable, and there's probably some benefits in this model with app-v than there would be in terms of having the dependency locally installed. However, imagine, for example, in this scenario here, we needed to just apply a security hotfix to dependency 1. We'd have to now go and touch every single package that had dependency 1, back in a sequencer, update that package, redeploy it, restream potentially some bits as well per payload of app-v package. And again, when you further expand that might become a bit unmanageable and a bit counterintuitive. So what we can look to do is actually shift those dependencies outside of our package and create a one-time package of dependency 1. And this is an example that we're going to be talking about back on our demos very shortly. A byproduct of this, like we already mentioned, is that our packages will probably reduce in size, often dramatically in size, because these dependencies sometimes are twice the size of the actual app itself in many instances. And then it's just a case of creating a connection group, which is a relationship definition for those members inside that connection group. Another great thing about this, and this isn't so much just to do with connection group, but it's just to do with app-v itself, is when we want to go and deploy dependency 2, an updated version, we can go ahead and deploy it to our environment, and we don't have to actually worry about that conflict, because as Britton showed you just now, we reduce the scope for conflict between those two packages. And I've actually seen this in real-life environments where app-v has completely unlocked the potential of these in-house redistributable teams who write these dependencies, because no longer do they have to regression test against everything before they deploy dependency 2. They can just deploy it out there even if no one's using it. And as and when app owners come to them and say they're ready, so for example, app3 owner comes to me and says, hey, Tam, I want to actually use dependency 2. I'll say, not a problem, it's already out there. They'll say, I didn't know that. We'll say, not a problem, here's your connection group, go wild. Same thing, a few weeks later, we might have the app owner for app 2 come along to us and say, I want to also use dependency 2. We say, not a problem, we've already got a connection group, we've already tested it, we're now going to change your relationship to be with dependency 2 instead of 1. And then I guess after a long while, there's probably always that one app owner who drags their heels, maybe gets a bit jealous about everyone else using the latest dependency, and eventually says, Tam, I'm desperate to get onto dependency 2, and we say, not a problem at all, and we change that connection group definition to also include them. It might even get to a point where dependency 1 isn't actually used at all in your environment, and you can go ahead and retire that package from your environment. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is plugins. Again, this is really expounded when we're talking about larger applications, maybe even Microsoft Office and those kind of suites of applications that might have tens, and I've seen hundreds of plugins across these types of environments. So we might take this scenario before connection groups where we have app 1 with a few plugins, 1, 2, and 3, packaged all into one package, and we're happy. But then this might become slightly unmanageable. For example, at the moment, we're basically going with a one-size-fits-all scenario, where everyone now is going to get plugin 1, 2, and 3, regardless of if plugin 1 is licensed, regardless of if they don't want to see plugin 2, regardless of if plugin 3 is only meant for a certain department in your organization. They're all going to get the all same plugins, and this isn't going to be ideal. So again, we can take that modular approach to packaging by shifting out these plugins into separate packages. Again, a byproduct of this is that app 1 will reduce in size, and we can then go and spin up a connection group that defines a relationship for these connection groups for these plugins and this application. So this all sounds good in theory, and this stuff always does, right? I can stand here and tell you how brilliant connection groups are and hide all of the issues from you and hide all of the gotchas and whatnot from you. But what I'm actually going to do now is actually outline the steps to success, because I want you to really be forward-thinking in how you work with connection groups to make sure you're geared for success. So what are our connection group steps to success? The first step is sequencing. Now, sequencing itself doesn't have to change in terms of the fundamental best practices just because you're sequencing for connection groups. However, there are some techniques that I'm going to share with you which will unlock you when you're sequencing for connection groups to be more efficient in how you do it. Once you've sequenced a suite of applications or componentized applications, the next step is to look at how your client takes delivery of those applications and how connection groups are registered, integrated, and inside your operating system itself. And that way you can better look to troubleshoot and manage your connection groups on your client machines. After that, we need to look at management, right? Because it's no good just looking from a client perspective. We need to understand from a management level how we can actually handle all of these relationship definitions that we're creating. And within that management, there needs to be some flexibility. We can't just send out all these connection groups statically defined and hoping everything's going to work. We've got to try and employ some flexibility to make them more dynamic in the environment. And then when all else fails and there's still conflicts, we need to look at prioritization. Now, the most important thing about prioritization you need to know is that it's spelt with an S. Agree? No. See, I've got some fellow Brits in the front row here who might agree with me. And we've got Britain here who sounds pretty British, but he's not. So prioritization, yeah, I won't get hung up on the S or the Z because I want to leave America in one piece, hopefully, tomorrow when I've got to catch my flight. But this is my slide, so we'll keep it British for now. So prioritization really accommodates for the situation where you have overlaps or potential conflicts and how we can deal with those conflicts. Cool, so let's kick into each step to success. And for each step to success, I'm going to give you a core demo, which will show you how you can leverage those in your environment. So sequencing. Like I said, there's not a ton to tell you apart from the standard best practices. Of course, sequencing itself is something that requires some attention, and we're not going to be able to cover off the sequencing art itself. However, all you need to know is your standard best practices apply. However, there are some feature sets you can leverage, for example, devirtualization, which will allow you to speed up how you sequence for connection groups. Now, devirtualization basically allows you to expand a pre-existing AppV package back to a locally installed app to then install another component of that app. It will make sense when we jump on the sequencer in a second. Also, with SP3, we introduced merged routes on the client side. And these are client-side based features, but they are related to sequencing. So merged routes basically accounts for the point in time where you have members in a connection group with overlapping folder paths, which we then merge by default on the client machine, which basically allows you to have greater success and less overriding taking place and conflict on the client machine. And a great thing with 5.1, which Britton alluded to in his announcement at the beginning of this session, is we're also introducing merged environment variables on the client side as well, which again is attributed to connection group members on the client side, regardless of if they have overlapping, essentially, environment variables. Those will be merged where possible. So let's kick into a demo and have a look at sequencing. So I'm going to flip over to my sequencer. And here we are on a sequencing machine. So Britton's already showed you on the client machine, and we're going to come back to that scenario where FreePlane just didn't work because it couldn't find Java. And we're going to address that as we go through this session. But first of all, I want to sequence another layer of this connection group scenario. So we've already got Java sequenced. We've already got our FreePlane mind mapping tool that requires Java sequenced. What about if we want to take it a step further and now sequence a plugin for FreePlane? So what I've done is actually I've brought along my existing AppV packages, and I've brought along the installer for my add-on. So I'm going to fire up the sequencer. And I'm going to use a technique called expand to local system. And basically what this means I don't have to do now is take back my original installer, my MSI or my XE for Java, my MSI or XE for FreePlane, reinstall both of them, go through the whole installation process, configure the applications to how I did for the AppV package. It becomes a bit cumbersome, and it also opens up the doors for inconsistencies. So what I can do is use expand to local system to expand a package back out to be locally installed. So before I do that, you'll see Java currently on this machine is not present in C program files. However, all we do is do expand to local system, and this should then populate Java back to being a locally deployed package. We can do the same for FreePlane, but I'm going to hold back because we're going to get the opportunity to do it in a different way, and I want to expose that to you as well. So let's go ahead and create a new package. I'm going to choose add-on or plugin, and you'll notice the workflow changes and gives us a prompt to install primary. So I'm going to fly through this, and here we are. We're at the point in time where the sequencer is basically hand-holding us and telling us, now's your opportunity to either install locally your primary application, and we've kind of already got halfway there because we've done Java, or B, we can also look to expand the actual AppV package back out to the local system. So let's do that. Let's expand FreePlane back to the local machine. And again, you'll see it popping up in C program files, FreePlane, there it is, and you'll see our application now is a shortcut on the desktop as well. So let's go ahead and install. So let's go FreePlane. And this plugin is called Get Things Done. It's just a Get Things Done plugin for the FreePlane console itself, and it appears under the Tools menu. And as soon as we start monitoring, I'm going to launch FreePlane. I'm going to go to the Tools menu to Add-ons and just install this quickly for us. So let's just grab the installer from the desktop. There we go, and now this should be available on restart in this menu here. So let's just close that and restart. And there you should see we now have our plugin there available to us. So I haven't had to install FreePlane or Java locally. I've just literally expanded them to local system and captured FreePlane as a plugin in its own right. So I'm going to stop now and save this package out. So now on my desktop, not only do I have JRE7 and FreePlane, I also have a FreePlane plugin called Get Things Done as well. So you can see how we've taken something that might have actually been one single AppV package and actually made this into 3 different components. And hopefully over the course of today, you're going to see why this might be beneficial in your environments. Cool. So we've done the sequencing. Now let's talk about the delivery. And let's talk about delivery from a client side. How do we actually define a connection group, and how do we get the client to understand these packages should be in a group together? The connection group delivery actually happens over PowerShell, as do most things with the AppV client. It's all PowerShell driven. And one thing I want you guys to remember is, regardless of what background you're coming from in terms of infrastructure, essentially they all do the same thing under the hood, which is PowerShell driven commands. And the delivery is very simple. There's an add and an enable to actually deliver the connection group, and there's a disable and a remove to then roll back and remove that connection group from the machine. And essentially all we do is actually consume, well, we actually feed the client a template XML file. It consumes that and it generates an effective XML file. And I'm going to lift the lid on that very briefly. Another thing just to note as well, connection groups can be targeted to either user or machine. And again, that's something we're going to talk about in more detail. So here I am on a client machine. And what we're going to do is just something we call standalone mode, which is basically the technique of delivering something without actually relying on any infrastructure, just using the bare PowerShell commands. And the reason I want to show you this is obviously this is how things work regardless of how you're going to do it in your enterprise. So as we mentioned, we use these XML files. So let's take a look at what they look like. So this is a template XML file, and I'm not going to go into all the details just yet. I'm going to save some stuff for later, but essentially all these XML files do, they're based on a schema. We have a name for our connection group. We have a version GUID and a connection group GUID, which are unique in their own right. So a connection group in its own right is similar to a package. It has its uniqueness on the client. And then in the packages section, we essentially just list out what packages are a member of this group. So very simple. And there are toolings out there that can automatically generate this for you, besides the standard infrastructures. And there's also templates for these connection groups available online as well. However, I don't see you in your day-to-day management of your infrastructure having to actually touch these XMLs manually. So let's have a look at how we deliver that connection group. So you see at the moment we haven't got any connection groups deployed. So I'm going to go ahead and run my add command. So my add-appv client connection group, and I simply specify the location of that connection group. There's my XML. And as soon as I hit return on that, basically that gets consumed into the appv client and gets added to the appv global catalog. Now you hear me talking about the catalog a lot, and there's a global catalog and a user catalog. So the global catalog sits in C program data, Microsoft appv client catalog package groups. And as I drill down, you see the GUIDs correlating with the GUIDs in the PowerShell command above it. And you'll see our template there sitting pretty, where we've just fed it into the client. And what our client's done is looked at this connection group template and generated a descriptor off the back of it. Now you might be wondering why there's two XMLs in here. That's going to become a bit clearer as we move through some of the future demos. So you'll notice I haven't yet got it as a user. So the next step is to then enable this connection group. So I'm going to enable my connection group. And we'll see now the connection group has been delivered to me as a user. And what's basically happened here is we've actually created the descriptor for the user under the user profile in app data, roaming, Microsoft AppV client, catalog, package groups, and we drill down and we'll see our descriptor in here that describes this relationship for my particular user at this point in time. So now I guess we can go ahead and launch FreePlane, and because it's in a connection group with Java, we should find it launches successfully. Cool. Also, from the client perspective, you should now see that our connection group is in use, as is the two applications that we've decided to put into that connection group. Also, just to kind of further show you that, if we go into an Explorer shell from within the application and we go to C program files, similar to how Britton showed you earlier, now we can actually see a shared view where we can see both FreePlane and Java being propagated into the virtual environment file system under C program files. Good stuff. So now I'm going to look to actually roll back from this standalone mode, because for the rest of the session, I'm going to actually be using my infrastructure to deploy and manage connection groups. So again, as we mentioned, the way to roll back is, first of all, to disable our AppV client connection group using this simple command. And I'm just going to rely on the name of the connection group for uniqueness in this case, because I've only got one. And what that would do is basically clean down my user catalog, as you've seen. And then finally, we do a remove-appv client connection group, and which will clean down from the app data location. Now, I know I mentioned that you probably wouldn't be using this on a day-to-day basis, but if you are testing and working with connection groups in a kind of development type scenario, I do see you actually having some interaction with these PowerShell commands in your environment. So we should find under the catalog for package groups, we're now empty as well. Cool. So the delivery is all well and good. We talked about how on the client machine we're using these PowerShell commands and XMLs to actually feed in these relationships to our client machine. But of course, that's not really going to be manageable on a higher scale, right? Now we really need to address management. Now, management can take many different shapes and forms, and you've probably got three main options for managing connection groups in your environment. The first is using Config Manager 2012, and we have the options to use virtual environments within the console itself, which will allow us to manage those. We have the AppV server, and as Britton mentioned with 5.1, we're actually bringing forth a new console with a new look and feel based on HTML5, which we're actually going to be using today. So this is going to be your first chance to have a look at how that great console is. And we can use a connection group scenario in that console. And thirdly, we also have the standalone mode or third-party tooling, which again just utilizes PowerShell. In fact, all of these scenarios all utilize PowerShell. So for those who put their hands up earlier about that they've used connection groups, how many of you use Config Manager to manage your connection groups, virtual environments? Okay, cool. And how many of you use AppV Server? So about the same amount for Config Manager and AppV Server by the looks of it. And how many use any kind of custom tooling or standalone mode or in-house solutions? Okay, so much less, about 3 or 4 in the crowd there. Okay, cool. So we're going to actually look at all of these scenarios, hopefully, and I'm going to try my best to keep both the Config Manager guys happy and the AppV Server guys happy. It sounds like an impossible task, but I'm going to try my best. And for the standalone guys, you're happy as always because I've shown you the PowerShell and you know how things work under the hood anyway. Another thing to manage, and this is just a kind of sideline that I do need to kind of mention, is state change. Now, with connection groups, there is a new way of thinking, or a different way of thinking at least, when we're talking about user customizations. Now, when you put applications into a connection group, the user customizations essentially get tied to that connection group. Not to the version of the connection group, but just to the GUID of the connection group. So state becomes stored under a connection group context. Now, this is something to think about, and I'll be showing you how that works in our demos today. But we do recommend, really, if you want to have a consistent user experience across devices and platforms for your users, regardless of whether they're using AppV or not, connection groups or not, then UEV or another UPM solution really is the way to go down. Of course, UEV presents a real good, clean solution for that. Let's take a look at management. So I'm over here on my server. So I'm going to try and show you a bit of both in terms of Config Manager and the AppV server. So first of all, let's look at Config Manager and how we deploy that same connection group that we just delivered via standalone mode to our environment using Config Manager. So what we'll do is, as you can see, we've got applications here delivered and different deployments, but we have our free plane application and our Java JRE7. So let's go ahead and create a connection group for those. So we're going to click on AppV Virtual Environments here on the left-hand part of the console. And we're going to create a new virtual environment. Let's give this a name. Let's call this JRE7. And now the way virtual environments work in Config Manager is all group-based. So we now begin to populate groups for our applications in terms of how they're componentized. So first of all, let's go and create a group for JRE itself. That would make sense. And we'll add in JRE7. So I'm just going to find the deployment type for JRE7 and add that in. And now I'm going to create a separate group for my JRE dependents. So let's say JRE7 dependents. And I'm going to add in freeplane 1.3.12, which is the current version we're running with, and add that in. So you'll see here, what we basically created is almost like a rule of the relationship definition that we're going to now put out in our environment. And basically what will happen is, on machine evaluation or policy evaluation on the client side, we'll evaluate ourselves against this rule. And if we happen to have both of those deployment types, you can see it says if we have JRE7 and freeplane 1.3.12, then we will then publish a connection group to that user or machine. And the way that works is basically on policy evaluation, if those packages are available, we essentially do the same thing I showed you already, which is spin up some PowerShell, spin up some XMLs, and feed them into the client itself. So very simple. So I'm going to hit OK on that and let that simmer in the background. So next up, this is probably what you wanted to see, and as Britton has mentioned already, we've got a completely new console for AppV Server. So you ready for it? Here it is. So, no more Silverlight. Is that a good thing or bad thing, by the way? I see some thumbs up. So this is based on HTML5, which again, as Britton says, allows us to be much more agile in how we develop for this console. It's got some real cool funkiness to it as well. I mean, most of the feature sets are exactly the same, but just in terms of look and feel, I mean, it resizes really well for different devices. Of course, many things are going that way. As you see, we get this kind of menu bar when we resize our windows. We've got a cool notification center for when we've kind of deleted or amended things in our environments, which we can minimize really easily. And the rest of the stuff I'll show you as we go ahead through the demos. So the console here, we've already got freeplane published along with Java. I'm going to go ahead and create a connection group. And I'm going to add a new connection group in here. Let's call this JRE7. And I'm going to click on that connection group, and I'm going to choose to connect in some of my packages. So let's go for JRE7 first of all. Let's go for freeplane 1.3.12. And while we're here, we might as well also deliver that plugin that we just sequenced, that Get Things Done plugin too. So we're going to save that out. One thing you'll notice is my Get Things Done plugin wasn't published, so we have to also make sure that that was published to our users, because connection groups will only deliver if the applications are available, unless we do something else, which I'm going to talk about later. The final thing to do with this connection group, other than publish it, is give it some AD access. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. So I'm going to publish this to my users. And I'm going to grant access. And the final step, of course, is then for me to then go ahead and publish my connection group. So there we go, simple as that. Next time we refresh on my client machine, let's just jump over there. You'll see at the moment we don't have any connection groups available because we've run our disable and remove on that client machine. I'm just going to go ahead and refresh with my server. And we see that connection group has now been delivered with our plugin. Let's give freeplane a launch. And we should find we now have our freeplane using Java JRE7. Not only that, we also have our Get Things Done plugin that we just sequenced together at the beginning of this session. So another thing we talked about was state change, and I think this is probably a good opportunity to look at that. So let's launch FreePlane again, and imagine I was a user and I wanted to change something about this package as I normally would. So let's do something around appearance. Let's change something cosmetic. So I'm going to change the look and feel here to be Nimbus rather than the default. And I'm told if I restart, we should see that look and feel. So with any luck, we will. And there we have it. You can see we've got a kind of different chromage going on with our user interface. So this is the Nimbus interface. Where has that change been stored? So with AppV, we know changes do get stored in an abstracted fashion. However, because this is a connection group, we've actually stored it under the context of the connection group. So let's go and have a look at that. So I'm going to go to C program files, C users, and I'm going to drill into my user profile, roaming Microsoft AppV client, and I'm going to look in the VFS where we know state is stored. And we've got all these GUID-based folders, and typically these relate to packages. But I'm just going to do a get-appv client connection group to expose which connection group we have at the moment. And you'll see our GUID for our connection group is B8BE. And if I go back to the Explorer, we'll see that we have that same GUID available here. So not only are we storing package-based state in here, we're storing connection group-based state in this location as well. So if I drill down in here, we should actually be able to find the state that we're referring to. So you'll see here we have that Nimbus look and feel, again tied to the connection group. So of course we have all the standard feature sets available to us in terms of repair, although you notice we can't repair the individual apps, but we can repair on a connection group level now. As soon as we put apps into a connection group, you lose the ability for a granular repair. Everything's done on a per connection group basis. And this is probably where UPM solutions will unlock us further from having to give this too much consideration, because they'll jump in before this and direct things on an app level. Keep an eye on that state change, by the way, because somewhere in the demos today, we're going to lose that state change, and it's going to be for a reason. And it'll be an interesting talking point when we get there. Brilliant. So management can be done in either SCCM 2012 or Config Manager 2012 and AppV Server. We also have the ability to use standalone mode or any third-party tools. I've seen some customers actually leverage standalone mode and build up their own kind of in-house solution built up on top of standalone mode, and that's actually not too uncommon out there as well. With all of that management, there needs to be a level of flexibility. Now, flexibility is really what's going to unlock us from having to define these static connection groups each and every time, and allow us to be a bit more agile in how we deploy them out to our environment. So let's take the scenario we're working with at the moment. Is that a question? So, yeah, it is.
Are you going to demo the SCCM deployment?
The actual deployment to the client? Yeah. No, so we're not going to be, the question is, are we going to demo the deployment to the client via SCCM? No, we're not. Just for time's sake today, we're going to keep it just with the AppV server, but essentially it's going to be doing the same things that we're showing you on the client side.
Does it not publish the connection group until both of the applications are on the machine? Or?
So the question was, does Config Manager not publish the connection group until both of the applications are on the machine? The answer is, with the current connection group virtual environment that we just set up, where they're connected via an AND logic, both packages will have to be available on the machine before the connection group will be then delivered. So the assessment will happen to see if both packages are available. If yes, then we'll spin up and deliver the connection group. So good question. And hopefully we can refer back to virtual environments and SCCM along the way, but just for time's sake, we can't really deploy to the client in today's session. So for flexibility, just imagine our scenario at the moment where we've got two applications, well, we've got one application, a couple of dependencies, and a handful of plugins. Yeah? It's quite a simple scenario. However, even with this scenario, if we're talking about the different combinations of relationship we could potentially have, even with this small scope of apps, it could actually get very messy. And we could end up with different connection groups for different scenarios and different environments for different users. And this is something we really want to get away from. This gets further expanded if we're talking about machine and user-based delivery, and we can almost double that complexity if we're talking about connection groups delivered to users and connection groups delivered to machines. So how can we get away from this? So one thing we've done with SP3 is really unlocked a lot of the flexibility that you can leverage to make yourself get away from this complexity to a point where we can have one more holistic, all-encompassing connection group that is applicable in all different types of scenarios. Now, the main things that actually drive this flexibility, like I mentioned, are all part of SP3. We have the use any version feature, which allows us to be agnostic of version, so we no longer have to statically define a package version in a connection group. We can be more flexible. Secondly, we also have optional members, so now not every single package has to be a member of the connection group. You saw with the plugin, I was quite attentive to actually publish the plugin before I then deliver the connection group. We no longer have to worry as much when we specify an optional member, because that optional member doesn't actually have to be on the client for us to deliver the package. And then finally, we also now support mixed targeting, where a user-delivered connection group can have a mixture of machine-targeted packages and user-targeted packages. So we don't have to worry as much about whether we're targeting a device or a user. Again, I'm going to talk about Config Manager and how this might relate to the Config Manager console when we get onto our demos just now. So let's jump onto my client machine. So we talked about a few features there, and also with 5.1 and even with SP2 as well, we've unlocked you in other ways with merged routes and the merged virtual environment variables as well. These are all things that help us to be more flexible. But let's take a look at the client here. So at the moment, we've got Freeplane 1.3.12. So imagine the app owner for 1.3.12 Freeplane comes along and says they want to now deploy a newer version. So let's just verify we're running with that particular version. You can see it there in the top right-hand corner. And now the owner of Freeplane wants to upgrade to 1.3.15. So what we do is we package the application. We then get over to our server. We then publish out 1.3.15. And now there's the small thing about connection groups. How do we now update our connection group to take accommodation for the new version of Freeplane? So previous to SP3, what we would have had to do is actually rip out the existing version and pull in the 1.3.15 here from the right-hand side. And you might think, well, what's no biggie with that? Doesn't sound like too much work. However, you can imagine, say that package was a member of multiple different connection groups across multiple different environments. You then have to now pick out and find all these connection groups and change them manually across your environment just for a simple update that's taken place with one of your simple applications. So rather than do that, we can still statically define Freeplane 1.3.12, but we just tick this box that says use any version. I'm going to save that out. Jump back onto my client machine and do a simple refresh. And what we should find is now 1.3.15 is on the machine. Not only that, it's a member of my connection group as well. So how did that work under the hood? Let's go back to our template XML file, which we know to exist in the global location, the global catalog, under Microsoft App V Client Catalog. So you'll see we now got different versions of connection groups because we've been updating them, right? That change that we just made was an update. So I'll pick the latest timestamp, which looks like this one. And you'll see our template file. This is where template starts to make sense. Our template file has an asterisk for version for one of the packages. And what that's basically indicating is that this package doesn't need to be of a certain version. Just use the latest that's available. And what the AppV client does is then generates a descriptor off the back of that with a version incorporated based on what version is available. Does that make sense? So now when we launch Freeplane, we should find that it's now running 1.3.15, our latest version, and we didn't have to change anything. In fact, if we now iterated through newer versions of Freeplane and we jumped even another version, it'd still pick up the latest version as and when we wanted to, because now we're not tied to version ID. You'll notice, however, even though we've jumped connection group version, our look and feel is staying the same, right? And we're going to lose it sooner or later, but at the moment it's staying the same. Let's look at another flexibility concept over on the server. In fact, before we jump to the server, I'm going to remove our connection group from our client, just to simulate a new connection group being delivered. So let's go ahead and disable this connection group completely. So I'm basically breaking free plane again for my user. So we should find my user now doesn't have a connection group. So imagine this scenario now. So we're on our environment again, and we're sitting in our app team location in the office, and someone comes to us and says, Tam, I want to now deploy a plugin for FreePlane. I say, yeah, not a problem. We've deployed many plugins, done it loads of times. I'll do it blindfolded, not a problem. But then they turn around and say, hang on, this plugin is actually licensed, and not every user has access to this plugin. So I say, okay, right, no problem. What we can do is we can publish this out to a separate group called Study Planner Licensed Users. Now, this plugin is called Study Planner, and we're only going to deploy this to a certain subset of users. So we go ahead and we publish this out. And now we've got the small matter of our connection group. So we go ahead and we change our connection group membership and add in Study Planner. Again, we save our connection group, and we jump onto our client and test. And what we find is, no matter how hard we try, and no matter how many times we hit this refresh button, we never get our package. Why don't we get our connection group? So I heard the right answer out in the crowd, and the answer is actually uncovered in the event log. So if we head into the admin location of our event log and we drill down, we can see there was an issue occurring. We can see that we failed to do something. We failed to publish a group. We failed to create a descriptor. And then finally, we get to the message that says a mandatory package of this GUID and this version GUID specified in the connection group of this GUID and this version GUID has not been added to the computer or entitled to the user. So just because this user isn't privileged enough to have Study Planner, a license for Study Planner, now they just don't get nothing. And now they can't even launch FreePlane. So how do we get around this? So again, it's all about flexibility. Let's look back on the server. And as simple as a checkbox, we just make this package optional. Yeah? So by ticking this, we're basically saying not everyone's going to have Study Planner because not everyone's licensed for it. But if they do, put it in the connection group. If they don't, no biggie. Just deploy what we can for them without Study Planner. So again, I'm just going to hit save, jump back on my client machine. Do a refresh. And we should find we now get our connection group minus Study Planner. So we're back to a working state. So the last point of flexibility was around mixed targeting. And I'm going to show you how some of this will relate back to Config Manager shortly, but let's focus on the AppV server for now. So imagine another owner of another plugin comes along to me, and they're the owner for a translation plugin for FreePlane. It sounds like there's a massive team in this organization just for FreePlane, so it's obviously quite an important application to this organization. So basically, we want to go and publish this out. However, the owner says this translation plugin has to be deployed to the machines rather than user. So they want it machine targeted for whatever reason in their environment. So if we click on this, we'll see this is actually published to computers. So we right-click and publish. We put it in our connection group. I'm going to choose my translation plugin here. We save this out. And because of the improvements we've made with mixed targeting of connection groups, when we jump onto our client machine and do a refresh, we'll find our translation plugin obviously comes down to our machine, and it also gets incorporated into our connection group. And just to show you that it is actually deployed to the machine, you'll see it there, and it's published globally. So let's launch FreePlane and check that our plugin is available. Of course it is. There it is. So connection group published to the machine, to the user, mixture of both user-targeted and machine-targeted packages. No worries. Our connection group still pulls them all in together, allows them to run together in one virtual environment. So let's quickly look at Config Manager and how some of this might relate. Again, we're not going to deploy to the actual client itself, but I'm just going to show you how we might expand some of these situations to the Config Manager as well. Now, Config Manager has some flexibility inbuilt into itself as well. In fact, it had a lot of this flexibility before SP3 was even released. And that's due to the rule-based nature of how virtual environments are defined in Config Manager. So with virtual environments, what we can actually do is use and, or logic. And the way we do that is via our group definition. So group to group, we always connect via and logic. And within a group, we always connect via or logic. Now, the or logic is what allows us to be a bit more flexible, because we're basically saying, if it's available, use it. If it's not, it doesn't matter. Use it or use this instead. And the way that works, for example, if we expand our JRE dependence group here and edit this, and we add in, let's say, our Get Things Done plugin, and we add in another deployment for our study planner, which, remember, is licensed, so not everyone's got it. And let's click OK. And you'll see the OR logic popping up now. So now what we're basically saying is, if Java JRE7 and any of these happen to be on the client machine, spin them up a connection group and deliver it to that machine or to that user. So you can see the flexibility that is inherent in virtual environments as well as the AppV server as well. So we're coming to the final step to success that I mentioned. We've gone through the other four, and the last one to really talk about is prioritization. Now, prioritization is when all of this flexibility and this management and this great stuff we talked about still needs a bit of love and attention, and we still need to do things to get things working how we really want them to. So let's take a couple of scenarios, and there's two main scenarios that prioritization really is important. The first one is within connection group members themselves. So let's take this example where we have app1 and app2 that both live in a connection group together. And they have certain paths, files, folders, and registry inside those two packages. So let's look at the first path. The first path is C program files apps app1, and then app2 is the same, but just app2. So of course, you know, there's no conflict there at all. They're just different folder paths. There's no issue to be resolved. Let's look at the second path. C program files apps common is in both of our packages, and they're both in a connection group. Has anyone got any idea what would happen in that scenario in a connection group? It will merge, exactly. So thank you very much to the guy sitting there, and you've obviously been listening very well, because what we do is we merge roots by default. So just because we've got a folder that overlaps, we're not too worried. We're actually going to merge that and show a holistic view of that folder. What about a second option down? Let's look at the second option where we have a license.xml sitting in that shared folder in both packages. What's going to happen there? Yes?
Depends on the priority of your connection or your application.
Exactly. So Aaron at the front has got it bang on the head. It depends on the priority. Because, of course, we can't merge these two XML files into one, can we? So what we have to do is actually define priorities. And, in fact, this is happening regardless of whether you're thinking you're doing it or not. When you create a connection group, you're defining priorities anyway. So priority 0 is the highest priority, and it's basically done on the order that you create your connection group in. So the highest application has a priority of 0. And there we go down numerically 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So in this case, app1 would have its license XML transposed into the virtual environment, and it would override that of app2. There's another type of priority we need to think about, and that's group membership. So connection group to connection group priority. So imagine we've got app1 here sitting in a tough position between two dependencies, two versions of the same dependency potentially. And we've got a connection group for each one. I now go ahead and double-click my app1. Which connection group does it use? Connection group 1 or connection group 2? Any ideas? So again, it's based on priority. Yeah? So it's not based on whichever connection group was delivered last or anything like that. Inherently, with connection groups, we can deploy connection groups with an inbuilt priority. So imagine our connection group 1 had a priority of 5, and connection group 2 had a priority of 2. The lowest numerical value has the highest priority. Therefore, connection group 2 in this point would win. When I double click my app 1, dependency 2 would go ahead and launch. Let's take a look at that whole scenario back on the client. So we're on our client machine and we've got our packages deployed. And I'm going to actually go take us over to the server because we've just had another request for another application. And that's FreeMind. Now, FreeMind is basically another mind mapping piece of software. So there's a lot of mind mapping going on in this particular scenario. And the owner of FreeMind says, hey, Tam, I now need to use Java JRE 7 as well. And I say, not a problem at all. We've actually got a connection group available. Let's just plug you into that. So I go ahead and publish FreeMind, and I go and update my connection group to include FreeMind. So now what I've basically got in this connection group is not just a static relationship between an app and its dependencies with its plugins. I'm actually co-hosting with other applications. So I've got FreeMind in the mix as well. So let's go and save this out and take a look on the client. So I'm going to do a refresh, and you'll see FreeMind now appears on my desktop. As part of the testing of this, of course, we go ahead and launch FreeMind, and we find that that works perfectly in its connection group. Happy days. However, a few hours later, we're still testing, and someone goes to launch FreePlane. And someone launches FreePlane, and they hit this error. And they're like, what's going on? So it goes to the support desk, we go to the app management team, we find out what's going on, and we think, do you know what, the last thing we've done was introduce FreePlane into this connection group. And now we're seeing FreeMind, and now FreePlane stopped working. Now, the only thing this could really be down to is priorities of connection groups. So we look at the members based on our knowledge that the higher priority in the order will take precedence, and we decide, just as a troubleshooting technique, to reduce the priority of FreeMind below that of FreePlane. We go back to our client. We do a refresh. What do we think? Okay, let's launch FreePlane first. So that was the one that failed. So we go ahead and launch FreePlane, and we find that starts working again, just by simply tweaking the priorities within our membership. Again, you'll see that our customization has stayed with us, just as a side note. What do you reckon about FreeMind? Works or not works? Let's have a look. It works. So in this case, the conflict was a one-way conflict. FreeMind had the potential within itself to affect FreePlane. Now, I don't demo this to make you nervous about putting things in a connection group together, because this is going to be the edge case where, to be fair, you would probably know about these scenarios before anyway, because these, even if deployed locally as MSI to a local machine, probably wouldn't live together very well in that scenario alone. So when you put them in a connection group, remember you are sharing a virtual environment, and therefore it's a shared environment, and they have the same potential to conflict. So the last thing I want to show you before we wrap up is priorities between members. So imagine the owner of FreePlane now comes along to me and says they want to now use Java JRE 8. And we've had this on the client ever since I've been talking to you. So we then spin up a new connection group for Java JRE 8. And of course, we do the same thing. We go ahead and we change the membership, JRE 8. And we put in our FreePlane. Of course, we're going to use the use any version feature because we don't want to be static. And we save this out. Give it some Active Directory group access. And then finally, just publish this out. So now that's published, and basically what we've got is two Java connection groups, one with JRE 8 and one with JRE 7. Back on the client machine, we go ahead and do a refresh. And because my users are in both of these groups, they get both of my connection groups. So that shouldn't be a problem, right? However, it is, because when they now double-click and launch FreePlane, nothing happens. Let's take a look at the event viewer for more information. And we dig down here, and very early on, in fact, we see pretty clearly for us that freeplane.exe could not be launched because the AppV client could not determine which virtual environment to use. So it didn't know which one to use, Java JRE 7 or JRE 8. So the way we resolve that, as we've already mentioned, is using priorities. And we can use that in the server just by going full screen here. Let's edit our connection group here, and let's make this a priority of, let's say, 50 to give ourselves a bit of breathing room. And while I'm here as well, I'm just going to shift out one of the plugins just for visibility. So I've got my JRE 7 with a priority of 50, and I'm just going to change this one as well to have a lower priority because I want them to use this one, let's say 20. I'm going to edit my membership as well to include my plugin. And there we have it. We have two connection groups, one with 50, one with 20. We now go back to our client and go full screen. We do a refresh. And now what we should find is we have both connection groups delivered. However, we know which one to use because of the priority values. And as you'll see, we're now using the latest and greatest version of Java JRE available, which is going to be the JRE 8 connection group. So to summarize what we looked at today, and I know we're running a little bit short for time, we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to give you a chance to ask questions as well. The connection group proposition is basically the whole proposition about allowing us to have that shared isolation for two or more AppV packages sitting on top of our AppV agent, as we've seen extensively in today's demos. To summarize, we talked about sequencing and how we can use the expand to local system feature to expand our packages back to our local system to allow us to sequence in a more component-driven, modular-driven way efficiently. We looked at the delivery on the client side with the template XML file and the descriptor XML file, the PowerShell, the add, and the enable. We talked about management, both with Config Manager and the new AppV server with the 5.1 console. We talked about flexibility of that management with things like use any version, optional membership, and mixed targeting. And finally, we talked about prioritization between connection group members and connection groups themselves. So with that, I'm going to bring Britton back on stage just to quickly summarize and wrap things up.
Great, thanks a lot. All right, so we want to get some questions here. Thanks a lot. Shout them. Related sessions, I mentioned there's two more tomorrow. You can get the videos on the other ones. The one that I would recommend you go to is the second to the bottom here at 12:30. Go see this one. Two of the presenters are here in the front of the room. It'll be a great session. Here's the resources to get in touch with us after the conference. We do have a user voice site now you can go to and submit your feedback, vote on others' feedback, have some dialogue with the community as well as the forums. We will be in the booth as well. Go to the Windows Management booth in the Microsoft Windows area. And then finally, here's our contact information. I'll come back to that in a moment. Just remind you, we love your feedback. Give us your feedback. Let us know what we can improve, what you liked about the session. With that, let's go to questions. So if you can step up to the mic, that'll make it easier for us. We don't have to repeat. If you have any questions, let us know. If not, go join the party. Fall Out Boy is going to be here soon. Let's start over here. Go ahead. Are we on over here? Oh, he's trying to get it. Go ahead, I can repeat it for you until he gets that going.
You'll have to start with ACL on the packages themselves, so the user has to write all those packages before you can set, let's say, an ACL on the connection group. You have to make sure that those packages are available for the user before the connection group gets
Can you repeat that? Did you catch that one?
Yeah, so I think the question was, do we have to actually give the Active Directory access or access to the applications before we then publish a connection group? The answer is yes, unless we're choosing the optional options by those packages. So if they're mandatory packages, those packages have to be provisioned to the user or machine before we can then deliver the connection group. If we tick the optional option for those packages, we're basically saying we don't need to publish them out to the user or machine. The connection group can be delivered without them. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next question? Go ahead.
I have a need for a few of the websites
Okay.
And so what I was doing is acting in Chrome, turning off the updates, and then doing a custom shortcut within an app mode so it shows up like an app window, no browser bar, no anything, and everybody just thinks they're opening an app. I want to make it modular where basically I can just update Chrome and all the other pieces that, all these other different packages that lay on top of it will just use the existing version. But I have to be able to create a desktop shortcut pointing back, and the only way I've found to do that at this point is a PowerShell script creates a symlink that finds, that points to the Chrome in the VFS folder under program data. Is there a better way?
So if I understand, so let me repeat the question so we don't have a mic. The scenario is Chrome. You've sequenced it. You want to run the Chrome apps. It essentially draws the screen inside of, makes it look like an application. It's really a website.
It's just a shortcut.
Right.
You specify app mode.
Right. So it's just a shortcut. Now you're finding the way you're creating the shortcut is you're creating a script. Is that right? You said, I'm sorry, PowerShell commandlet?
I have a dependency for each one of those apps that depend on Chrome. Point back to a dependency that is a PowerShell script that creates a symlink. So C program files, Google Chrome points to the VFS location.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, based on that, you should be able to, I mean, Chrome should expose itself, if they're in a connection group together, to those apps in the standard locations. So if you VFS'd Chrome,
The desktop icon has to be in the other app package.
It's not in a connection group is what you're saying then.
No, I've got them in a virtual environment through SEC.
Ah.
But if I create, like if I build it out by expanding everything like you demoed and create the shortcut, put them in the connection group, then when it delivers, it doesn't see Chrome under C program files x86 in the desktop.
so I think that's what we have to really look at, because in theory that should all see it. If you VFS Chrome, you should see Chrome.exe in its native location under VFS.
It creates the common folder under program data and whatnot.
Yeah.
But that's not C program files and whatnot. It's C
Sure.
program data app
Yeah.
blah blah blah.
So, I mean, get in contact with us, because we should be able to work for you to make sure your apps in the connection group can see
Yes.
Chrome where they expect to see it.
Send us an email so we can actually see it. I
Yeah.
think we could probably help you out there because
Yeah.
that should work.
I mean, I've worked around it at this point, like I said, by
Yeah, that's not an elegant workaround by any means.
when I went out looking through the user community,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of people with the same type of issue that
With Chroma specifically?
well, not Chrome, but
Yeah.
just shortcut from an app in
Creating it from another package. Okay, that's interesting.
doesn't take care of it.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad you brought that. So here's our contact information. You can download this from the Ignite website. Yeah. So get in touch with us. Appreciate it. Cool. Thanks for coming to the session. All right, more questions. Who is next? This side of the room. Go ahead, sir. No one? Okay.
Cool. Well,
All
we're
right.
here if you want to talk further.
Yeah, well, if you want to come back up here, there was a gentleman that wanted to come talk in more detail. Come on up.
Otherwise, enjoy the party, and we'll
Yep.
see you there.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.